Welcome to the Imago Dei Recovery Podcast, where we can discover God's heart and unearth the masterpiece of God's image inside us. On today's episode, we look at faith, and we look at the life of Abraham and what we can learn about faith through his life. We look at what faith looks like in recovery and how to give ourselves grace if and when doubts start to creep in and when we are driven by fear. What is faith? Faith is completely trusting in something, or in the realms of spirituality, believing God and what he says is true about himself and what he says is true about you. One definition of faith in the Bible is found in Hebrews 11, verses 1 through 3. Here we read, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Faith is believing that God is who he says he is, has done what he said he did, and made you to be who he created you to be. What he says about himself and what he says about you are true. Faith is important in our recovery journey from unwanted sexual behaviors because we need to reframe who we are and who God is. We need to believe who God sees us as and who we see him as. It takes faith for us to accept that God truly loves us and to accept that he is not a judging, wrathful God who wants to bring harm upon us and who is disappointed in us. We need faith to believe who he created us to be and who he is himself. A useful character to look at when investigating faith is Abraham. In Romans 4, 1 through 3, Paul says, "What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness." See, Abram's faith and trust in God was what justified him. His faith is what put him in proper standing with God. In Hebrews 11, 8 through 12, we find the following. "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore." We find Abraham's name in Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, because Abraham lived a life of faith. He trusted God as he left the land of Ur, as he left the land of Haran, and journeyed into Canaan, in Egypt, and back. Abraham was a sojourner for all of his life, and he had to trust God for protection. He had to trust God for provision, and he had to trust God's covenant with him that he would gift him offspring as innumerable as the stars of the sky and the grains of sand by the seashore. He had to trust God's promise that he would make of him a great nation, and that he would bless his offspring with a land for them to inhabit and settle, a land that would become their own. Later, in Hebrews 11, we find written in verses 17 through 19, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, 'Through Isaac shall your offspring be named.' He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Abraham even trusted God enough to be willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, the son through whom all of these promises were to be fulfilled. He knew that God was able to do the miraculous, and if he had to sacrifice Isaac, God would bring him back to life, or God would provide another way for his promise to be fulfilled. What incredible faith that must take, both for Abraham to be willing to sacrifice Isaac and for Isaac to be willing to lay down his life, trusting God that the promise of blessing on his life would come to pass one way or another. So here we have Abraham, this incredible man of faith, this guy that we all strive to be like, who lived every day by faith, right? Surely he never struggled and had doubts and fears and thought that God wouldn't fulfill his promises and didn't trust God to provide for him, right? Well, if we look deeper at his life, there are several instances where Abraham was ruled by fear, where he was ruled by doubt, where he did distrust God. For instance, in Genesis chapter 10, we read, "Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, 'I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife." Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake.' When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, "She is my sister," so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go.' And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had." In this instance in his life, Abram does not trust God. Him and Sarai, his wife, Sarah, are headed down to Egypt to escape the famine in the land. As they journey to Egypt, Abraham is overcome with fear, and he tells Sarah that if anybody asks, she is to tell people that she is his sister, not his wife. He doesn't trust that God will keep him safe. He doesn't trust God's protection. He doesn't trust God's provision. Instead, he takes matters into his own hands and reacts out of fear. In fact, it's not Abraham that suddenly becomes courageous and stands up saying, "Hey, that's my wife. What are you doing with her?" Instead, God steps in and curses Pharaoh and his household until Pharaoh realizes that Sarah is actually Abraham's wife. That's right, even in the midst of Abraham's distrust and fear, God still acts on his behalf to protect him, encourage him, and bless him. Later in Abraham's life, doubts, mistrust, and fear again come to visit. In the story of Sarai and Hagar, Sarah, in her own moments of mistrust and fear, encourages Abraham to have sex outside of their marriage bed. She encourages him to have an affair with Hagar, her handmaid. Abraham does not refuse, as he is wondering how God is going to provide him with the many offspring that he has been promised when his wife can't have kids, seemingly. And so he agrees to have an affair with Hagar. He agrees to lie with her and have sex with her. And lo and behold, they have a kid together. Sarah is incensed and jealous of this affair, seeing that the relationship that Abraham has with Hagar is not healthy for her marriage to Abraham. She feels betrayed. She's a betrayed spouse, even though she encouraged this sexual acting out by her husband. She asks Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away, and Abraham complies in order to restore his marriage with Sarah. God enters the scene again and assures Abraham that the promise of many offspring will come to pass through him and Sarah, and not through Abraham and Hagar and Ishmael. Shortly thereafter, God reaffirms the covenant with Abraham and changes his name to Abraham, and promises that his offspring will be innumerable, and that all nations of the earth will be blessed through his offspring. Surely after this affirmation, Abraham starts to live the life of faith that Hebrews 11 makes him famous for, right? Well, in chapter 20 of Genesis, we read, "From there Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev, and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, 'She is my sister.' And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, 'Behold, you are a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife.' Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, 'Lord, Will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' In the integrity of my heart and in the innocence of my hands, I have done this." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." Here, in the first 7 verses of chapter 20, Abraham, again a stranger in a different land, tells the leader and his people that Sarah is not his wife, but is in fact his sister. He recommits the same lie from years before. He falls back into the old pattern that he lived in previously. He gives in to the same fears and mistrust that he has struggled and battled with years prior, and probably throughout much of his life. So, what happens when he's confronted by Abimelech? Well, starting in verse 8, we find, "So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, 'What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done.' And Abimelech said to Abraham, 'What did you see that you did this thing?' Abraham said, 'I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, This is the kindness you must do to me. At every place to which we come, say of me, He is my brother.'" When confronted by his lie, Abraham doesn't really confess. In fact, he doubles down by saying, "She really is my sister. Yeah, she's my wife too, but she is my sister. She's actually my half sister," which, I'm not sure whether that's really true or not, because earlier in Genesis, Sarah is called the daughter in law of Abraham's father. I'll leave it up to the Hebrew scholars among us to determine whether or not daughter in law and half daughter are the same thing. I am not versed in that. Whether or not Sarah is Abraham's half sister, what really is shown here is Abraham's distrust and fear. He's reacting out of fear for his own life and not trusting God to protect him, not trusting the promises that God has given him, not trusting the identity that God has bestowed upon him. God has to step in again and act on Abraham's behalf because Abraham is not standing up for himself. Abraham is not living out of the identity that God has given him. What does this mean for those of us in recovery? What does this mean as we seek freedom from our unwanted sexual behaviors and other unwanted behaviors? Well, it means that we need to give ourselves grace. There are naturally going to be moments when we have mistrust, when we have fear, when we have doubts. Even this amazing pillar of faith had those moments in his life. You are going to struggle with fear and doubt and uncertainty. As a matter of fact, I think that that's part of the pain that we have to walk through, is questioning God, questioning where he's been, and exploring that thing, picturing him in those moments of pain that we've experienced in our lives, picturing his love for us and experiencing it in very real ways. As we develop these new memories of God going through these painful experiences with us, we establish a new kind of faith, one that is not just based on the intellectual knowledge that reading the Bible provides, but one that brings in the other side of our brain and becomes an experience, becomes a lived experience, one that we share with God, and one that is affirming in our lives that God is with us. I know that in my past, I have struggled with my faith from time to time. I've wondered, where was God when I had that asthma attack? Where was God when I felt insulted by my family? When I felt insulted by my peers? When I was bullied for how well I did in school? When I was bullied for how poorly I seemed to be doing at sports? When I was bullied for being asthmatic? Where was God when I was struggling with unwanted sexual behavior. The reality is, he was right there with me, walking through every moment by my side, loving me, wishing that he could take away the pain, wishing that he could protect me, wishing that this world was not a place with pain and suffering as a result of sin, where we could all be protected from it. He was right there, seeing the pain that I was going through and knowing that he was going to heal me from that pain in the future, and knowing that he had things planned for me. He had good works in my future already planned for me to walk in them. This is what Ephesians 2:10 says to me, is that God already knows how he's going to use me, what he's going to do through me, and he has me on that path. Currently, I'm in this transition period where I've given up life as a scientist, life as a chemist, and I'm entering into life as a life coach, life as a recovery coach. I've been praying for over 5 years that God would show me how he wants me to serve him. I'm praying for that opportunity. And now, here I am living in what I think is that opportunity, but I don't really know. And honestly, I've had a number of people praise me as I have left the world of a scientist and entered into this world. And honestly, I've had people praise me as I have left the world of a scientist and entered into this world of trying to start a ministry, trying to start a recovery business. And they praise me for the faith that I have in stepping out on faith. And it feels a little false because I say, I don't really feel like I'm stepping out on faith. I feel like I've been praying for this opportunity for a lot of years, and I haven't seen where God wants me to go. I didn't really choose to leave my last job, but as a result of moving last summer from Wyoming to Missouri, my work could only keep me as a remote employee for so long. And so at the end of the year, they had to let me go. And I was forced into this transition. I have often described this transition to feeling like I've been pushed off of a cliff. I didn't really jump off, I was pushed off because my job disappeared. And now I'm falling, not really knowing what is going to happen. There's a lot of fear there. There's a lot of wondering what God is going to use me for. How is he going to use me? What is he going to have me do? I feel like I'm falling and I don't know where the ground is, but I trust God to catch me. And maybe catching me looks like letting me hit the ground and experiencing pain and Imago Dei recovery not becoming successful because he has something else for me. He has a different plan. And honestly, that will hurt. That will be painful. That won't feel very good. Seeing something that I'm pouring time and energy into, that I'm passionately pursuing, not succeed, to see it fail on some level. And even if it does, I know that God has something else in store for me. So after the impact, I'll get up, brush myself off, and try and step forward, trusting God, and whatever he shows me is next. This is what we want to see accomplished at Imago Dei Recovery, is see lives restored, see God give people a vision of who he has created them to be, and help people discover what that vision is, and discover the truth of who God is and who they are, who God has made them, and discover the truth of who they are and who God has created them to be in the future. If any of this resonates with you, please visit my website. Please reach out for a free coaching consultation. Please comment on this podcast or send me an email at james@imagodeirecovery.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'd love any feedback that you care to provide. And here at Imago Dei Recovery, we want to help you live knowing you are God's masterpiece.